I knew what I would have done had I gone over. I would have wrote it out. We'll drop the gun belts and go at it. And he said, I might not win, but you're going to know you're in a hell of a fight. 6x6, and I was pretty proud of it. The first big case is pretty neat for a warden, and 3,000 tickets in my 31 and 3/4 years. I said, yeah, I'll take the job. One of the reasons, not the only reason, was I could have a dog. I've had a dog my whole career, and it was awesome.
Welcome to the Boundary Sign Company podcast. For all of you out there, we are starting a new podcast. My dad, Bill Koppen, and we're here in Montana. The original sign that I made for your retirement party, that's where the whole sign company came from, because, well, you can tell the story if you want really quick, and then you can go into what you want to talk about.
Well, I just wanted a Bob Marshall sign. That's where I worked.
Yeah.
I did 40 years in law enforcement. I spent almost 24 years here in Seeley Lake and worked the Bob Marshall Wilderness, so I wanted to have a sign and asked him if he could make one, and he did. Spent many hours back there, many days, worked it with the horses, and had a great career. And that's where it all started. And I went to school for forest management and went into law enforcement later on and got the job that I retired from. But I started out with the Forest Service and did about 6 seasons with them, and I was forest management, and that's where I kind of knew I wanted to be outside, and I ended up going to Medicine Bow National Forest, working for the Forest Service, and it was a seasonal job, and did everything in the winters, did every job I could get, but the seasonal job was a good one with the Forest Service, and started off with, like I said, I was in, I did a little engineering, did a little trail crewing, trail clearing, my bad, and then I also got into the recreational part of it and became a wilderness guard, and that was kind of the start of law enforcement. You're supposed to ask a few questions, but
You're telling the story.
I know. I'll tell the story.
Well, you want to start from the very beginning. That's what you're saying.
Yep. Yeah, and the Forest Service was real good to me, and I was going for a permanent job, but I never quite got it. But if I'd have stayed at it, I would have. But I was a seasonal, so I did that for pretty close to 5 seasons, maybe 6. I don't know. My memory's not as good as it used to be. I'm retired now. Been retired 4.5 years. Great career. So after the Forest Service and getting I put myself through the academy, the law enforcement academy. I was scheduled to go to FLETC in Georgia at Glencoe, and as a seasonal would have been a kind of a feather in my hat, but I didn't get to go because I got bumped out by some permanent employees. So as a seasonal, I didn't go. So I put myself through the law enforcement academy out of Bozeman and paid for it myself, and that was a 12-week school, and I got my credentials for law enforcement. And that was the Forest Service. I ended up being a wilderness guard in the Taylor Hill Garden. So that was the Forest Service. Then I went ahead and I was a police officer in the wintertime. Had to make ends meet. I had a wife, and we were going to try and get a family going and all that, but that was out of West Yellowstone, Montana, so I was a police officer. Did that for the winter season and knew I didn't want to be a cop because it's a hard job, and I was thinking I'd rather deal with wildlife than with people. And ends up that you, as a game warden, you deal with people too. So law enforcement this day and age is a pretty tough job, and a lot of respect for it, and we got to have it, and it's a good thing. So I did that for a winter season at the West Yellowstone Police Department. I was working the night shift. I worked off of a snowmobile. I worked off of horses. I worked off of the squad cars, out of the squad cars. And then the Park Service came along and said, I could probably get a job with them and maybe have a better chance of getting a full-time job. So I was a park ranger, I think about, it was 2 seasons, maybe 3. like I said, I got a little off there, but
In Yellowstone.
in Yellowstone, I was stationed out of Tower. I was a seasonal, and then I was stationed out of West Yellowstone during the winter. I got 2 different seasonal positions, but still never had a full-time job. So yeah, ask a few questions. That helps me. Like I said, I don't remember everything, but I'll do my best. But anyway, I was fully intent on becoming a permanent law enforcement park ranger. They've got some shows out now. They're doing Yellowstone Wardens. Yellowstone Warden, which is not a true name. You're either a Yellowstone Park Ranger or you're a fishing game warden, a Montana game warden. But anyway, that show came off of Wardens, which I was on, did that show too. And also on that Yellowstone Ranger show, or Yellowstone Warden, I get them mixed up because they're not a right title, but people like to watch those shows. And anyway, the Park Service was good. I was seasonal, and then I was going to go ahead and try and become a full-time park ranger, which, good job, would have had the whole United States, to work out of, and I thought that'd be pretty cool. And so I worked at that, and I ended up getting a call from Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. So that hat came about to play. And first season I said, no, I'm gonna work at the Park Service job and try and get that full-time job with the Department of Interior. This is the Department of Agriculture. This one's the Department of the Interior. People get that mixed up too. So they came along after I'd worked about a year and a half seasonal jobs at the Park Service and said, hey, you want to take the game warden test? I said no, I think I'll go with the park. And so they kept this job with the Park Service. I was the backcountry ranger. I worked out of Slough Creek, Elk Tongue, Hell Roaring, and Buffalo Plateau. Did the Poacher Trail all the way up to Gardner, and we caught some bad guys, horn hunters and some poachers, and there was a lot going on back then. I mean, this was in, 1988 I took the warden position, which was the second summer they came, or the second time they came to me and said, hey, you want to take the test? And I said, yeah, I'll take the test. So I took the test. They had a whole bunch of tests then, physical fitness and psych and all that stuff, and passed them, and I said, yeah, I'll take the job. One of the reasons, not the only reason, was I could have a dog. I've had a dog my whole career, and it was awesome. In the back country or in the front country, and Montana Game Warden could have dogs. And so I said, I'll do it. So I became a Montana Game Warden, and that's where I stayed. Permanent job, 1988. Had a wife named Kim, and without her, none of this would have been possible. And that's a fact. And my family and the dogs. So that's kind of the start of it. And this is the hat I wore a lot. And I worked hard, and I loved it. I loved catching bad guys, and I loved catching people that were poaching, and I loved catching people that were abusing the wildlife. And there's a lot of good people out there, Jordan. A lot of good hunters, sportsmen, landowners. But there's some people that were abusing the wildlife, and that's the ones I wanted to get. And so this hat here is the work hat. And I'll probably never get rid of it, but anyway. So that was kind of the start of it.
All right. So I came around in '88. You were still a Tower Ranger.
You had a sister before you.
Well, yeah, I know. Let's start with her then. Well, it's just I want to incorporate like going in to some of these areas and backpacking or hiking. Would you ever go backpacking with my older sister, Lindsay?
Yeah, I took her in too. I had a backpack. She was the first, not as much as you, of course. You were, you got to see so much and do so much, and I was able to incorporate you into my work. But it was, it's a give and take. I mean, you couldn't go on some of the bigger busts that we did as far as being a game warden. I mean, there were 4 huge busts that I was involved with in Montana. The 4 cases I was talking about were, there was a monster case out of Great Falls. I was the field warden with it, in it, or when it happened. It was on National Geographic, and it was a big case. It was a family affair. You can look it up. Then I had 2 out of Seeley Lake that were real big. I was the field warden, and one was backcountry stuff and illegal outfitting. Another one was over limits, shooting out of season, bears, night shooting. And then another one was a bunch of antlers, like 85 antlers, taken off the game range. And we put them all back, but it took a couple years for the case to clear. And that was on that Warden show. I want to go back to and start at the beginning of Fort Peck. That's where I was stationed. And when I went to Fort Peck, it was 104 degrees. And my wife, Kim, was in Tower Ranger Station in Yellowstone National Park, and
Higher elevation, cooler temperatures.
yeah, and plus
And Yellowstone.
the park. And
You had everything.
she had, I mean, we love Yellowstone. We love Glacier, but Yellowstone's special for us. And she, what are you doing? We're going to Fort Peck, and we'd already had Lindsay. She was born in '85. You were born in '88, and you were born while I was stationed at Tower. Matter of fact, you were born while I went to Fort Peck in Bozeman, and that was in '88. So I stayed there about a year and a half in Fort Peck. But I was a workaholic, and I went all the way up to the border of Canada and all the way down to Jordan, which is your name, but not because that's not what you were named after, the town of Jordan. But we had some poaching, some spotlighting going on in the Milk River Valley. Well, I was new to the area, and I wanted to get after it. I mean, there was I was traveling 3,000 miles a month covering that area, and I had Fort Peck Lake, and I had all the country down to Jordan. I had all the way up to the border, and I was talking to landowners, and I was just having a blast. And I was working 60, 70 hours a week. I mean, it was crazy. We didn't get overtime at that point, but we could get a little bit of compensation for it or something. But it was a lot of work, and we enjoyed it and loved the job. So I was getting calls that the spotlighting was going on down by the Milk River, so I decided I'm going to go out and do some work at night. And I don't know what possessed me, but I came ripping up it was called Tower Hill, and I had not a new truck, but they gave me a truck, obviously, and I go up, and I'm real excited to get looking. It was in the dark, and we had blackout lights at that time on the bumpers, and you could just see a little bit. Well, I go ripping up this hill and it was up there a little ways, but it wasn't a mountain, but it was a good, ended up being a little bit more than what I thought. So I go up, and I'm gonna take a look off the top of this hill to try and see the spotlighters down there, and they were regulars on Friday night and then Saturday night is when they were doing it. So I believe this was a Friday night, and I got a little excited, I'd say, and I was ripping up to the top, get to the top, and I'm charging up there. It's a little bit flat, and I drop over the edge.
In your truck.
In my truck. And I got the front wheels over this edge, and I'm not seeing what's there. I mean, it's just like dropping them off a porch, and I thought, well, it's just a little drop off there, and I'll back up. And I put it in reverse, and I'm spinning. And I got my foot on the brake while I'm trying to back up. It was automatic, so that part was good, but I'm just spinning, and I'm still got that front end over, and I'm looking at just darkness. And I got a little concerned, a little bit worried here. So I stopped, and I'm just sitting there, and I'm not rocking or anything, but I know I got a little problem here. And then it clicked. I got four-wheel drive. So I go, put it in 4-wheel drive, and ease off the brake while I got the gas on a little bit. Back right off it. I was shaking. Man, I said, oh man. And I got out, looked around down there. I had my spot and scope and binoculars and everything, but I didn't get them out. I said, you know what, I think I'll go home. So that night I went home, and I went up the next morning and I looked at that, and something I should have done before I went up, maybe scope the area out where I was going to go. And that's what wardens do. They get up on high spots, and that was in my head. I mean, that's still my first start at all this, and I looked down that hill, and it was straight down. And I happened to be on probation, so I was I knew what I would have done had I gone over. I would have wrote it out, because what's in your mind? What would have happened if I?
What were you saying? It was a cliff? It wasn't a cliff.
Oh, it was. It was. Yeah, it was not a cliff, but it was straight, and it would have been. I would have wrote it out, but I would have flipped it and rolled. And
who knows?
Yeah, I had my seatbelt. I would have had my seatbelt on, but the thing was, I would have wrote it out because I wouldn't have wanted to have been fired, because I would have wrecked the truck. But so, God willing, I was still here for my first probationary time, and I learned a lot that night. But that next day, I learned a lot that morning, I guess. Looking down there, I said, oh my gosh, that would have been bad. But maybe not lucky, just blessed. And then we ended up catching them, and they were shooting a lot of stuff down there, and won't name any names, and there were some drugs involved and the whole work. So it was a good case, and like I said, that's pretty good story there, and true story.
Do you think that's what got you hooked even more into law enforcement and game warden, is maybe busting those guys, so it evolved into more of a hunger to try and bust more people? Or has it always been there to, protect the wildlife and try and, make things right when people were doing something wrong?
Well, it kind of started out with, you want to start a little bit slow, but there was a lot going on up there. And so I knew I had to get busy, and I went from being I started off doing trails, and then I was an engineer, and then I ended up being the wilderness guard, and then I went to West Yellowstone as a firewood patrolman for the Forest Service. So that's when kind of the forest or the law enforcement started. But this was just the clincher that, when I got the game warden job, that I knew I was going to be involved in law enforcement. I mean, we were peace officers for the state of Montana, so we had a lot of authority, and our search and seizure. I mean, we had, if there was a camp, we could kind of go through it. Now there was the Bullock decision, where you have to have the reasonable suspicion or probable cause to do it. And we were a little bit more allowed. We were allowed to do a little bit more with our search and seizure, but now it's all pretty equal. And we try and be fair. I tried to be fair. I wrote 3,000 tickets in my 31 and 3/4 years for the Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. It was called Fish and Game when I started. Now it's Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. And I had at least that many warnings. Half of them probably verbal, and the other half written warnings. So probably 4,000 of them. And there was a lot of wardens at that time. There was only 67 of us in the field. But we can get into that later. We'll do a little bit here. The next story, I'll give you one more story, was the one where, and I have permission, I'm not going to name any names, but I had a captain that was, I didn't have a captain for a long time up there. It was in Fort Peck, and I was just pretty much running and gunning a little bit. I was working the whole lake, and Fort Peck's a monster lake. I was checking fishermen. I was working the water safety. I was going up the hills, the pines, all the valleys, and all the little inlets. And there was elk, and so I was working some of the hunters. through the boat, off of the boat, and then on land. And then we were doing a lot of calls. I think the tip mount program had just started at that time. But anyway, I didn't have a captain for a while, and I was the only warden in Fort Peck working out of Glasgow. And then we ended up having a captain come in. I won't name any names, but he was having a kind of a bad week, and it was a guy, one of the best wardens ever Montana's had. But anyway, I came into the office. This is a little bit of humor here, but I talked to him about. He said, "Yeah, that's a good story." But I came into the office and I was wearing tennis shoes, and he said, "Bill, what are you doing wearing tennis shoes?" I said, "Well, I'm going to go out in the boat later." He said, "Well, you're not in the boat now, are you, Bill?" And we'd clashed a little bit, but he was my boss and I was on probation, so you don't want to, make the captain mad. But anyway, he said, "Hey, you're not on the boat now." I said, "Yeah, I guess you're right." But he said, "You got an attitude." And I probably did. I had a lot of experience and stuff, but he always said, 5 years to be a sergeant, and probably 8 to 10 to be a captain. And I was a field warden my whole career. So anyway, he said, "Come out to the shop with me." I said, "Okay, I'll go out to the shop." And I go out there. He said, "All right, let's drop the gun belts." I said, "What?" "Yeah, let's just get this going. We'll drop the gun belts and we'll get after it." I said, "Oh, okay, but I'm on probation and probably won't fare too well for me." He said, "Hey, let's just get it over with." And I said, and there were some people watching, and we're best friends now, and was one heck of a game warden for the Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, or Fish and Game at that time. And he didn't stay as a captain long. He went back to the field, and it was quite a deal. I said, "No, I can't fight. I'd be fired." And I made a good call there, because you don't want to be fighting on the job. And that's enough on that one. But he taught me so much, and even ended up being a neighboring warden. And you learn so much from, like I said, I think there was only about 67 field wardens at the time. Might have been 15 or 18 people in the offices, and then they had the Helena crew. Maybe 193, 95 total people. Not a lot in the field, but so that was a little humor there. My first big case, which my captain taught me a lot about that too at the time, and that was the one where the bow hunters were shooting the elk in the legs with the 22s and crippling them, and then shooting them with a bow. And I have my first antler. I was able to keep it. They said I could. This was my first case, but we could. It's a 6x6, and I was pretty proud of it. The first big case is pretty neat for a warden, and it was an unlawful possession, unlawful transport, and I think it ended up being an overlimit because the guy had more than one elk. So that's and loss of privileges. Usually it was about a 2-year, 24-month loss of privileges, and close to $1,500, $550 fine, I think, for one of them, $350 for the other. Anyway, yeah, when I first started, there was kind of just slaps on the hands for the violations, and now you can go to prison for it, and you can lose privileges for life, and the fines are a lot heavier. So, I mean, you want to talk about the wilderness, yeah, we're going to have a bunch about that coming down the road, but I think that's enough for tonight for me.
Okay, sounds good.
That's all I got.
All right, thanks for tuning in. We'll get on it for the next one.